The Truth Girls.
Hi everyone. Sometimes the problem is that you can't remember, and sometimes the problem is that you can't forget. Like sometimes you just really want to forget that something ever happened, but it just keeps coming back to haunt you. Well, science is working on helping you forget all your bad memories. A common approach to bad memories and dealing with PTSD is called CISD, Critical Incident Stress Debriefing. The idea here being that after you went through something really stressful and traumatic, you should talk about it right away to unburden yourself so it doesn't become a buried memory and haunt you forever. The problem with this is that it doesn't work. Scientists have discovered that there are two parts to memory. One is the formation of the memory, but then there's also the maintenance of it. And every time you pull up a memory, you're actually strengthening the connections in your brain that keep that memory alive. Plus, you're also adding input to it from your present situation. And so if you're in a very emotional state and you pull up a memory, you're going to add more emotion to it. If you have a very good therapist who is able to guide you so that when you bring up a bad memory, you can also bring up a more positive or empowering emotion, this can help interrupt the circuits that you've made in your brain associating that memory with some very traumatic feeling. You can sort of rewire it to the new emotions. But in general, dredging up bad memories does not help solve the problem. It just makes it worse. So what else can you do? Well, you can try to forget about it. Well, one study on erasing unconscious bad memories, what they found was that if you just make a conscious effort not to remember it, it might help you forget it. But they did say that it's easier to do this maybe with remembering it or forgetting an image of a coffee cup than, forgetting about something really awful that happened to you. In that case, you might need drugs. The forgetting pill erases painful memories forever. Well, they don't quite have the forgetting pill yet, but they're pretty close to having something like it. Actually, there are several drugs that can interfere with basically your maintenance of memories. Ecstasy can work the same way that a therapist does to reroute your memories to more positive associated emotions. You take the ecstasy, you talk about whatever it was that happened, but you feel so good on the ecstasy that when you later think of that event, bring up the memory, you're also bringing up some of the feeling that you had when you brought it up while you were on ecstasy. This is not the same thing as going to a rave and popping an E. This is pharmaceutical grade stuff in the doctor's office under controlled circumstances. Another drug that's been used for this kind of thing is propranolol. It inhibits norepinephrine, a neurotransmitter involved in the production of strong emotions. In 2008, a clinical psychologist called Alain Brunet at McGill University, right here in Montreal, did some studies involving giving propranolol to people who had PTSD from a traumatic event. While the subjects were remembering the awful event, the drug suppressed the visceral aspects of their fear response, ensuring that the negative feeling was somewhat contained. So a week after doing this, they came back, and those who had received the propranolol showed significantly less stress response when describing their traumatic event than did the people who received placebo. You can pretty much do the same thing with xenon gas. So when you dredge up the memory and then add the xenon, it will alter sort of how that memory is being stored in your brain. A single exposure to the gas, which is known to block NMDA receptors involved in memory formation in the brain, dramatically and persistently reduced fear responses for up to 2 weeks. So it's not permanent, but it does something. But there's more. It doesn't have to just be drugs. It can be things that will interfere with protein synthesis in your brain. A certain protein production is involved in the formation of memories in the brain, and if you give a drug that inhibits the synthesis of these proteins, it sort of blocks your brain from being able to form memories. The idea was you could dredge up the memory and then give this, and it blocks your ability to keep this memory and basically nukes the memory. And in the 1980s, a neurologist called Todd Sachter, he actually refined it even more down to a molecule called protein kinase C, an enzyme turned on by surges of calcium ions in the brain. Well, he finally found an enzyme that could disable this very specific protein and nuke the memories. But scientists aren't stopping at the use of drugs. They did this study on mice. They send the mice through a maze, and when they get to something nice, like a piece of cheese, parts of their brain light up because they're happy. When they get to other parts where there's no cheese, they're like ho-hum, and they just keep going. Now the scientists know which parts of the brain light up when the mouse goes where the cheese is, and they know which parts light up when the mouse goes where there's no cheese. So later that night, when the unsuspecting mouse is sleeping, the scientists come along and put some probes and wires into their brain. So when the parts light up where there was no cheese, they light up the pleasure centers. And when the mouse wakes up, they associate those no cheese areas with pleasure as if they had had cheese in them. This is all very interesting. I'm glad it's only happening to mice. I mean, I could see how it could have applications for PTSD, but could you see what would happen if it fell in the wrong hands? Let's say you were being held against your will, and your captors decided they wanted to make you feel positive about something that you didn't naturally feel positive about. And then you could just go to bed, and they would go in and put the wires into your brain. In a science fiction kind of way, I could see a society where people who don't toe the line and don't appreciate certain things, like the government, they could be taken to these training centers where they put the wires into their brains. But in the meantime, all sci-fi aside, the practical applications of all this information is to know that if you did have some bad experiences, it's probably not a good idea to keep dredging it up and talking about it. You have to sort of train yourself to divert your thinking to something else specific, sort of distract yourself intentionally, and over time the association between the memory and those intense emotions will lessen. Anyway, let me know what you think, and thanks for giving this video a thumbs up. Thanks for listening to me, and I'll see you next time.